and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Chinwe John and Happy New Year. Today I have a very special guest. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the countertenor Tim Mead. Thank you, Tim, for joining us.
No problem. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Yes. Thank you. Tim was actually on stage last night, so it really means a lot that he can join us here today. So just a brief bio, really brief. Tim Mead is an English countertenor. He began doing his public performances very early. He was in the choir at Chelmsford Cathedral, and he studied, at the junior department of Trinity College. He studied piano and cello. Ambulance. before going on to be a choir scholar at King's College, Cambridge. And then he won a scholarship, or many scholarships, and went on to the Royal College of Music. Is that correct?
That is all correct, yes, a long time ago.
Yes. And so if you don't know Tim Mead as a countertenor, then I'll say if I had to list the top 3 countertenors active now, not only in terms of the length of time for which they've been actively performing, and the fact that he's basically performed with all or almost all of your major orchestras and ensembles, certainly in Europe, then I'll tell you, for the beauty, the color and warmth of his voice, he's definitely at least on my top 3 list. So I'm really, really pleased that you could join us here today. Thank you.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
And you're joining us from Amsterdam, is that correct?
I am, yes. I've been in Amsterdam now for almost 2 months, but we'll be going home on Monday morning.
Oh, home sweet home. And you're performing the role of Ottone and singing that role in Agrippina, Handel's Agrippina?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't actually watched the opera, but I read up on it and I saw it's the same set of characters that feature in La Incarnación de Popea.
Yeah. So there was a season many years ago where I actually did both the Monteverdi opera and the Handel opera in the same season at the same opera house.
Oh my God.
And the same people played the same characters, and that's quite interesting.
It's really interesting, and I just find the real life story really fascinating. And I read up on the characters, and when I was done, I was like, you know what, I want to just cool my mind down and enjoy the sort of like the rewrites, the Agrippina rewrites. I think it's just happier. It's just happier because the reality, those characters didn't end up very well.
Yes, I mean, if you had an opera because Agrippina would come first and Popea would come second.
Yes.
So, I mean, maybe there is one that we don't know, or I don't know, but we really need the third one, which sort of where everything unravels in quite gruesome brutality.
Absolutely.
And I did do a production of Agrippina once some years ago, where this story in the future was sort of foreshadowed in a sort of video epilogue.
Okay,
bloody and gruesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got a chance to look at your costume. You're dressed up in very chic modern day wear.
Well, do you know what? It's quite unusual these days. I guess we're worried about how we finance these things to have so many costumes. I've actually got 4 different costumes for this.
Oh, wow.
show. The first is a full formal navy uniform with a hat and gold bands on my wrists and things. And then I have sort of a few sort of casual suits, and then full bow tie for the final scene, for the final sort of the scene that wraps everything up.
Wraps everything up. You look very sharp. Very sharp in those suits. Yeah, I absolutely love the costumes and the female roles as well.
I think the girls get the more flamboyant costumes. I mean, Popea especially has some quite incredible. She has this yellow dress that is, I don't know how to describe it, but it's huge, and I have to try not to trip over it.
Step on it. It's a vision. And so when you're playing a role like this and you have to get your mind into this particular era in which they were, but you're dressed in modern costume, does it in any way make it harder for you to get into the frame mind of that time? And
no, well, I don't think that you ever have to. With these stories, the great thing about them is their universality. you don't really need to be thinking of ancient times. These people and the way they deal with each other and their emotions and the way their brains work is it's hardly different today than it was all those years ago. So we're telling a very modern story of it. The director compares it to House of Cards. So it's a sort of political machinations of who's going to come out on top, who's going to have the most power. And along the way, there are some love stories as well, which is, again, just life, really.
Wonderful, wonderful. And have you ever performed with anyone in this cast before? This is with the Dutch National Opera. Have you ever performed?
I've sung at Dutch National Opera before. I made my debut here. We're trying to work out, I think it's about 15 years ago.
Wow.
In a very unknown piece called Ercle Amante by Cavalli. And I came back a few years later to do Benjamin Britten's Death in Venice, but that's been quite some years ago. But in terms of the cast, these are all singers who I'm working for the first time, which is, after all this time, is quite refreshing. And we're very fortunate that Dutch National Opera's assembled quite a stunning cast, I think, especially in the two lead female roles with Stephanie Dustracht as Agrippina and Ying Fang as Popea, two outstanding singer actresses who every night the audience just delights in.
Yeah, I'm sure. I watched some clips of them doing other performances. I'm like, wow, this is a very, very beautiful, strong cast. So for anyone out there, if you're lucky enough to be able to go to Amsterdam, come into Amsterdam to watch this, then you say your final show is when?
So we have a show tomorrow, and then we have a matinee on Sunday. And I think the matinee is probably already sold out because they're incredibly popular. People love Sunday afternoon opera, apparently.
No, yeah, absolutely. You guys are great. All right, so I have some little questions. All right. So you've mentioned before in other interviews that you don't come necessarily from a family of musicians. And initially there was a debate whether you would do law or music, and music won over. But what gave you the courage to, or was it just you jumped into it? You weren't really thinking, or you thought?
I was going to say what gave me courage. I don't think it was a question of courage, because I don't think I could fully comprehend what it is I was letting myself in for, and the risk I was taking. I mean, I should imagine as a parent, if you have a child who has the possibility to have a law career or a career in the performing arts, I think with my sensible hat on, I would say the law career every time, because this is a unstable, unpredictable, at times harrowing career that we have to navigate. And I think there are definitely easier paths that can be taken. But at the end of the day, you do it because something draws you to it. There's something about it that you love, something that you can't imagine not doing. So that sort of overrides all of the more practical considerations, I think.
Yes. Well, I, for one, I'm very glad you chose this path. I'm sure it's tens and thousands of others. And then I really love the King's College choir. And I was just wondering, for you as a young teen, you're a teenager when you joined them, what was that like? And what was it like to work under the direction of Sir Stephen Cleobury?
When I first went to Cambridge I think I went to an open day first, just to sort of see what it was like, although I'd already decided that's where I wanted to go. I didn't want to go anywhere else. I wanted to be on TV at Christmas. I saw it as the best choir you could join at that age. So I was determined to join it. But you turn up from a sort of small provincial town like I came from, and this grand, centuries-old set of buildings that you're suddenly a part of, suddenly part of the history, suddenly part of the tradition that spans back generations. And it's quite overwhelming. In fact, I was just saying the other day that I haven't been back to Cambridge for maybe, 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And I think there's still something quite extraordinary and special as you walk through the gates of the college or walk through the doors of the chapel, and you realise that you used to live just a stone's throw away within those grounds.
Wow.
That is this sort of icon of not only Christianity, but of culture and of education and of academia around the world. And it's one of those things that as a teenager, you probably don't fully appreciate how good you have it. But I'm glad I did have it.
Yes, yes, must have been wonderful. Because I just absolutely love those Christmas concerts. You
I
guys
mean, I try not to miss them. Sometimes I miss it live on Christmas Eve, but can always catch up on Christmas Day.
I actually once saw a little clip of you somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was on one of your social media sites. You got a little clip of you singing back then.
Yeah, there is a few. I just need to. There's because I was always, for 2 of my 3 years there, I was in a bad camera position, so hardly featured. But in my 3rd year, I was in a good camera position.
Good, smart. So you learned. You learned. All right. Let's see. All right. So this one, coming out of the 2020, 2021 era, how do you feel your profession has changed, industry and personal wise, if anything?
Well, I think industry-wise, especially in the UK, but I think maybe Europe-wide, I'm not so sure about the situation in America, but I think everyone is struggling with how we finance this very expensive art form. I don't think it's about necessarily doing less. I think hopefully it's not, but often it's about being more inventive, maybe slightly cleverer with how we achieve things. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think for such a grand art form, there is often a degree of waste, maybe not just in terms of materials, but in terms of cost. So anything we can do to make the product more efficient without lessening any of its wonder and the quality that draws us to it in the first place is a good thing. We have to remember that many companies didn't survive the pandemic, so most who have survived have come out worse off. So the fundamental thing is that we keep going, and we are keeping going.
Yeah.
But we often have to adapt to make that happen.
Yeah.
And personal-wise, I mean, the pandemic was not a good time for anyone in any profession. I mean, I guess I've seen maybe some friends of mine who work in banks who just sat at home and carried on banking and getting paid huge sums of money. So maybe life wasn't so bad for them, but for artists who lost all their income overnight for an unknown period, I can only talk from my personal experience. I don't know what the global experience of artists was like, but for me, I don't think it's ever been quite the same since. I think the world feels more precarious. I think touring the world feels more exhausting. But we're still here and we're still doing it. So
very much so.
Nothing good comes easy.
Yes. I love the way you express that, by the way. Now, I have a couple of your recordings here. So I'm starting with this one, which kind of is a good flow, because this was a project that you actually initiated during a very, very difficult time. And this is Sacro Profano. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a collection of works by Antonio Vivaldi, and you worked alongside Arcangelo and Jonathan Cohen.
Yeah.
Yes. So, sorry, go on.
So yeah, as you said, it's a project that was initially supposed to be recorded in the first February of lockdown. So that would have been February. I can't remember the years now, but the February. It came out of that. I think everyone, especially in the arts, found that January of lockdown the darkest. In London, it was particularly cold, and before Christmas, we'd just had a little ray of hope that we could start doing work again, and it was snatched away from us. In fact, I was supposed to be singing Agrippina in Amsterdam that January.
No way. Okay.
Yeah, this is a reshushing. And we got to February, and I suddenly realised that I was not in the physical, vocal, or mental shape to complete this album. And as I approached the orchestra and the conductor and said, well, I don't think I can do it, they actually confirmed that many of the musicians also felt that they couldn't do it. Even though the regulations would have allowed us to be in a space. to make the CD. So we made the decision to leave it, to postpone it, because for me this is my first self-funded or crowd-funded and album, and the first that I'd created solely on my own. And the last thing I wanted to do was to get into a studio and not do what I'd planned to do. So we did postpone it, and as with all these things, as soon as things opened up, everyone's schedules became jam-packed again, and we couldn't get the same players. We could barely find space in my schedule to do it, but we sandwiched it in between two opera performances in the UK. And like all these things, I look back at it and I will never think something is perfect, but when I consider where we were in that February to where we were in the summer when we recorded it, it's a miraculous achievement. I think not by me necessarily, but by everyone involved, as how quickly we got back to working at such a high level. And those sessions, although were probably the most exhausting sessions I've ever done in my life, were in many ways the most rewarding. And some of the moments, I will never think something is perfectly good. It's just not my nature. But there are some moments on that disc where I think, yeah, we did something there. That was worth the pain.
Yeah, I listened to it yesterday again, and it's just gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Now, for something this important, why did you choose Arcangelo? They must have meant something to you. They're a wonderful ensemble, but what drew you to choose them?
Yeah, so I've known Johnny Cohen, the conductor the founder of Arcangelo, for many years.
Okay.
We narrowly missed each other at Cambridge, but then he's slightly a few years older than me, but he was a continuo cellist in the Orchestra of the Age Enlightenment for many years. And when I was about 24, I made an unscheduled debut at Glyndebourne singing the title role of Caesar, and Johnny was actually the continuo cellist that day, and I'd worked with him in many orchestras, and then he founded his own group, and it just seemed that he's one of those people that fundamentally is a great musician and a great collaborative musician. And I think the older I get, I don't really have the older I get, I want more collaboration. I don't want dictatorships in music making, which, there are two ways of doing things, and that's fine. But I have no real desire to be up there and directing myself. I think there are other people that are suited to that, but that doesn't mean I don't have ideas about how I want things to go. And Johnny was a great collaborator in that respect, and was not afraid for me to express my ideas, especially express my ideas to the orchestra. And then, of course, I rely so heavily on him to put those ideas that I have into real practical, useful terms. And of course, he's contributing his own ideas as well. It's a two-way street. But that's why it was really important that I worked with him on this, I think, because I couldn't have done an album where I didn't feel I'd said what I needed to say.
Yeah, well, I absolutely love this. It's gorgeous. So here you have it. Now we move over. Yeah, it's gorgeous, gorgeous. So we have a tale of two Purcells, and I'm starting with the first one.
Yep.
Yes, this is Purcell Songs and Dances, and you did this with Les Musiciens de Saint-Julien avec François Lazarevich.
Lazarevich, yeah, I can never say his surname either. So don't Lazarevich, I think is how he says it.
Lazarevich.
Yeah.
Lovely. This was actually the first album of yours that I bought. This came out in 2018, but I got it in 2020, which is when I discovered you. So this is wonderful. And you've shared before in other interviews that actually they had prepared this recording, but the person who they were going to work with couldn't make it.
No, I don't think that's the case. They had made a plan to make an album of Purcell music with songs for countertenors in it.
Okay.
And they just hadn't got a countertenor, and they asked me.
Okay.
So I had very little input into what was on the CD. It's very much Francois' CD that I just happened to appear on. But happily, we've been playing this program for, well, I don't know if we did it in 2018 for 6 years now, and we're actually bringing the program to London for the first time in March.
Yeah.
Having been, I think, the amount of times we performed it in France, I think we must have been to every French town by now. But
yeah, because I happened to be, I was in London November 2022, so I was actually hoping I could catch something by you, and then I saw you were in France during that weekend in November doing these songs. With
it's
but
very rare that I'm in London, let alone performing in London. So.
okay. Well, I'm sure people will enjoy it. So I really love this, and it's very different from the others. So we'll come to that. Let's see. All right. So the next parcel is Beauteous Softness.
Yeah.
And this now is with La Nueva Musica with David Bates.
Yeah.
Yes. So this isn't just parcel. It has people like Blow, right? And William Webb.
And I think there's some William Webb as well. Yeah.
Yeah, this was released actually last year.
Yeah.
So like what I found very interesting with these two parcels is that they're just so different, at least to me. If I took the songs and dances that you did with La Musicians de Saint Julien, it has a sort of, I was like, okay, if I had to visualize it like a painting, for me, it was like an outdoor painting with people, I don't know, at a picnic. It's very light, dancing. That was the sort of celebratory air I got from that. This one has a lot of magnificent melancholy. It's sort of like if you painted a castle and you had different rooms. And so each of these songs represents things going on in a different room. And there's some melancholy and some celebration as well, but just a little bit of a darker tone. And then the sound of the instruments. I'm not a musician, so I can't describe these things, in a professional way. But even the way the music sounds, it could have been by two different composers. Just to me, it sounds so different.
Yeah, I mean, I think a more lazy commentator would probably say that one is very English and one is very French. And I think there is something in that, but I don't think it's just that. So Francois and his group really specialize in ancient folk music and folk music from all over. And he brings that to whatever he does. And you see that in the songs and dances. It's he brings out a musette, which is like an old bagpipe. And he, in the way he sort of inflects rhythms they're sort of Frenchified in a way, which is not stylistically incompatible with Purcell. There's a very French style to his writing as it is. And with Beauteous Softness, I don't know, maybe it's because we were coming out of lockdown when I put the program together, but because I had a complete say about what we put on this album. I'm always more drawn to the melancholy over the joyful. It's for me, it provides more interest. It's more beautiful. In many ways, this album couldn't be further from Vivaldi I released just before it, which is all sort of high-strung virtuosity, and this is more quiet beauty or beauteous softness, as I yeah. And it's kind of a luxury on my part to program that, because I didn't even try to make it a more varied album. I just I delved in as deep as I could to the sort of beauty and because I know melancholy is sadness, but that sort of melancholic air is not necessarily depressive or sad. There's a real beauty in that sensibility, and I think for that Elizabethan age, it's incredibly English sentiment that I just sort of wallowed in and enjoyed it for as much as I could.
Yeah. I get you. Sometimes we do need that melancholy. It helps to bring up your emotions up to the forefront. And sometimes you do need to grieve, and then you feel better after.
Right. Do you know what? I was reading something just the other day about, because I remember being asked this question in an interview many years ago about the purpose of art and whether what we do changes the world, which I think is a grand claim for any artist to say that art changes the world. But what this writer, I forget who it was now, but said was, is that art gives us the space to experience feelings and not feel alone in those feelings.
Absolutely.
So in some ways, it's like oral and collective therapy. And I think if this album, through its sort of luxuriating in the melancholic, in the sadness, in the intimate beauty, if that provides some companionship to someone's feelings or own inner torment, then you haven't changed the world, but you've definitely done one good thing for the day.
Yeah, definitely. And I think arts, music, it may not change, but it certainly shapes. Definitely. Definitely. It
Yeah,
shapes the world.
I sort of kept coming back to this. Does art change the world? Or, when you think, well, people who are curing cancer probably change the world in a more material way. But then I was reading something about the role of public art and, public sculpture, and how it can unobtrusively come into someone's life. And even if they stand there for a second and stare at it, maybe it gives them a sense of grounding or a sense of belonging, or even just providing beauty to people's lives is enough.
Even if it were just that, it would be enough. But even like medically, we do use music therapy when we're helping people with Parkinson's and with dementia, or even people with stroke. Some people cannot speak, but then they can sing, and then they get to do speech intonation therapy. So music, art in general, I don't think it should be downplayed in any way.
I think my natural reaction is to downplay it slightly, to counter all those people who cheaply say they're changing the world. I think it's a very easy thing to say. Like many things, to say anything is very easy. To do and to actually enact these grand claims is quite another.
Yes. You did have the video series on YouTube that you had done with La Nova Musica, where you had what's called Purcell's greatest
finest verses. I think,
finest verses. Let me tell you, at least just for me as a person, that is one of the most beautiful programs I've ever watched. Everything is perfect. Yes, the songs you selected, the way it was shot, the way Andy Staples shot it.
So Andy Staples is a very good old friend of mine. We were both in King's College Choir together. But that was for all of us one of the first projects that we could do. It was in the summer of the first lockdown, in a very strange sort of cave-like building that looked like and you know what? None of us. The interesting thing about, I said this in another interview actually, but the interesting thing was that none of us were in our finest form. Of course we weren't. We were so out of practice. We were all dealing with the stress of life. And although we did use it as a sort of fundraising tool and a way to connect with audiences again, I never felt it was really about anything other than ourselves. And I think that was okay at that time, because I think it was, of course, we had the fundraising aspect and the connection with the audience thing, but it was more important that we did something and felt like we were useful to ourselves. And that music just seemed, I mean, this grew from that series, but that sort of, I've always said that melancholy air of Purcell almost in that time seemed quite cathartic as a way for us as performers to process the grief, I guess, of that time. Because I think however COVID went for you, whether it was a breeze or horribly tragic, I think there's definitely some grief for many things lost, be it just time or connection or anything. I mean, there's so much going on.
All right, now we go next to another handle. This is a recording. Let's see, Amadiji that you did with the Early Opera Company.
Yeah,
this was released in 2022. So this one here, beautiful. Yeah, tell me about this. How did you get to work with the Early Opera Company? Was this a project you always wanted to do? Had you performed this live before? How did this come about?
So Christian Kernan, who's the founder and conductor of Early Opera Company, is someone I've known for my entire career. We worked together originally back in the early 2000s at a youth opera company doing some Handel together.
Okay.
And we've worked together, most seasons ever since. Christian and I actually performed the opera Amadigi on stage as our first opera after lockdown at the British Festival Garsington Opera. And actually, I didn't sing the title role of Amadigi. I sang the secondary beautiful role of Dardano.
Okay.
But I hadn't known at that point that it had been Christian's desire for many, many years to record this opera. Only he'd promised the role of Dardano to one of his very old friends, Summers. So Christian contacted me and said, "Look, I'm going to record it, but you're going to have to change to the title role." Which is, it's a great role. It's a really difficult role, actually. It's a lot to it. In fact, I did it in concert at the beginning of this season, totally uncut. And it is just, I think it's 10 arias or something. And it just feels relentless. But it's one of Handel's great magic operas. And there's sort of fascinating, evil, witchy women characters and beautiful male lovers and a sort of almost not convincing hero in Amadigi, but he gets
there. Lovely. So now we have something that's like an old boys reunion album. I mean, that's what I call it. This one is a proud song.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Proud songsters. So, you did this with former alumni of King's College.
Yeah. It's do you know what I've often said that King's is not always the best at celebrating its alumni, which, considering the amount of us who've come from there, it's quite. I mean, you look at the list of people who were on that disc, and we could have another list of other people who weren't on it, and it would still be equally impressive. I mean, the interesting thing was that we barely saw anyone else when we were doing it because we just came in for our 2 songs, and unfortunately for me, the person before me was Jerry Finley, one of the finest song singers in the world.
Yeah.
So I was not the least bit intimidated walking in after him. But
No.
I think it's a great idea, and I'd love to see the college and the choir maybe do more of that.
Yeah.
Because I say I've hardly even been back to Cambridge in the last years. But Andy Staples again is on that CD. Michael Chance contributes, I think, 1 song.
Yes. And then you have Lawrence Zazo.
Lawrence Zazo, of course, who was only in the choir, I think, for 1 year.
Okay.
But this is a great lineage of countertenors.
Yeah, Mark Stone.
And I think it's important to celebrate what an important role these choirs play in British music making. I think it's too easy to see them as some reserve of the elite or the privately educated, which is not the case for me, certainly. And many of us work really hard to get to these places, and a lot of the people that worked really hard are the ones out there now doing it, and it's just great to see. And every year a new set of people come through, and there's the opportunity to produce another really interesting, hopefully artistic story from the same place that I was for all those years.
Yes, it's lovely, lovely. And what I love about it is the fact that you have different voices and each of you has a particular something that you bring. Because if it had just been one person singing these particular songs, I don't know if it would have been as exciting, although they're all great, songs.
Yeah.
But the texture, the very texture makes all the difference. So I really
think that's the case with lots of the song recital in general is a format that I don't necessarily love, because I think it's quite hard for one singer to provide that interest for the duration. I think it's far more interesting to have a combination of voices. I mean, such variety. I mean, even with the countertenors, if you listen to me and then listen to Larry Zazo straight after, I mean, they're 2 very, very different voices from the same place, but very different.
Then I came, let's see, this is a very long question, sort of. So that's like any fears and hopes for artists navigating, this issue of AI. I mean, it's always been there, but now I just think it's more in the forefront, And so in your mind, do you have any fears and hopes for artists having to navigate a new world, really, I'll just start with AI. Then I said the changing audience due to age, the people who really embrace, when I look in the audience, most of the people are, above 60. Of course, we have lots of young people that love classical music, but the fact of the matter is the bulk core audience is above 60. And that's an audience that will eventually, pass on. And then to throw on top of it, you have funding cuts. At least every time I open The Guardian, I don't know if it's just me, because when, it just looks like they're always cutting something.
Yeah.
Something is being chopped. So in your mind, again, like you said, you've worked very hard, and the people of your generation, you are lucky. You've been doing this now for, I don't know what, like three decades. You've been singing ever since you were a teenager. So you've had a lot of time to make connections, and people know, what you can bring. But for those young people, let's say someone who graduated just before the pandemic hit and then has now come out into this world, and they made that sacrifice and they chose this career. Any fears and hopes that you can see for them?
I think opportunities are fewer than when I left music college, for sure. But if we're honest, opportunity compared to the amount of graduating students every year has always been a not great ratio. It's always been hard. It's just harder now. I mean, the sad truth is that of those graduating, many will not go into full-time performing careers. But that doesn't mean there aren't useful careers within the creative sector where these people can find hopefully fulfilling roles. And with your question about AI, I mean, I must admit I don't know so much about it, but all I'd guard against is that we preserve the genuineness of the product. I think it'll be too easy to have artificially beautified, and we still do it a bit in audio editing, but having the real product is important. You still need a real human on stage doing it. I don't think we'll ever be replaced in that regard. Who wants to go and see a hologram of a singer?
A hologram? I don't, that's for sure.
But also, we talk about perfection, and if AI produces perfection, will that, without the human vulnerability and foibles, be interesting to us? I fear not. But maybe AI is clever enough to build these in. And with your last question about aging audiences, it seems to be the constant moan of the classical music sector about the age of audiences. And I wonder whether we should worry so much. I wonder, because people are getting older every day. And if classical music is something that people invest more time and money in as they age, we will always have a new audience.
That's true.
The thing with the younger audience is they have fewer resources and more things they want to be interested in, and probably less time, because the younger generation are having to work incredibly hard to get by in these times.
Yeah,
it's not something that worries me. I think if the seats were all empty, I'd be worried. If they're just full of older people, then they're still full. And also, we have to remember that younger audiences are consuming their culture in less traditional forms. So they're not necessarily going and buying a seat and sitting in a concert hall, but they might be watching on YouTube, they might be streaming. And I think it's important for arts organizations to make sure that access is promoted and eventually properly monetized, so that we can keep supporting the art form in its live capacity, because without it, we don't have a product.
Yeah. Well said. And then something else that I really admire about you and your career choices is that you have embraced contemporary composers. This is something, there was 2 years ago, I was reading an article and they were featuring a very big tenor. And they asked him, would you ever perform work by a contemporary composer? And he said, oh, no. And he mentioned that a friend of his had once performed work written for him and lost his voice. And I was like, and for me, just me personally, as an audience and, a writer, I just feel that one of the ways classical music can continue and grow is, of course, if we support contemporary composers. There wouldn't have been a Mozart, I think, without Haydn and things like that. It always evolved. And but I see that a lot of the big performing centers feature heavily, the older work, and just very few works by contemporary composers.
Yeah, I think there's a fear amongst promoters of having empty seats for contemporary work. I mean, even with someone who I don't even consider contemporary these days, Benjamin Britten, who does get scheduled in London on a regular basis, but always for a very limited number of nights because they don't think the audience is there. And of course, they do it for 5 nights and it sells out every time.
Yeah.
And I would say when we go back to the diversity of the audience, the one place we can guarantee to have a young audience is a contemporary music.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned the singer whoever this famous tenor is who didn't want to sing contemporary music, I would hazard a guess that they probably didn't want to do the hard work that's necessary to learn it.
I think so. I think he was being a little bit selfish because he's very big and he has mastered this particular one.
Yeah.
And he went on another interview and he said, no new music, only the old stuff. And I'm like, get out of here.
I mean, I don't know who the singer is, but you often find with these big tenors, especially, people who sing this big repertoire, so they only sing a limited number of roles. I mean, what a luxury it is for them to only have to learn a handful of roles.
Yeah.
Whereas I've lost count of the amount of roles I've had to learn because I can't guarantee there'll be a Bohème or a, I don't have those sorts of stock titles in my repertoire. But contemporary music is hard. I mean, and it's hard to sing. And I sort of get his point about how it can be hard on the voice, but I mean, you learn to do it. That's
yeah, and well done you. So you have some beautiful, I watched your Written on Skin, not live, but I got to see that on video. That was really beautiful. And most recently, you have something out. I think, is it called Garden of Good and Evil? Do I have that?
Yeah. So that was a program we did in London and at a festival in the UK, and then we did recently in California for a week, which had 2 new pieces, one by Tarika Reagan and one by Erilyn Wallen.
Yes.
And they wrote them together. I think the idea was that they wrote each other's texts and they were sort of designed to be performed together. And they're 2, you couldn't get 2 more different works, to be honest. Tarek has written this piece called The Golden Measure, which is it's sort of got its roots in American minimalism, but it's quite hypnotic and static. And now I'm trying to remember the name of Erilyn's piece. My brain has gone blank. But Erilyn's wonderful piece, The Forms, it's called.
Okay.
Is chaotic. It's hectic. It's like all the notes have been thrown at you at once, and they're both responding to the same thing. They're both responding to creation. Okay. And they're quite fascinating to hear side by side.
Yeah, lovely. And then any recent special moment? Okay, funny question here. But have you had any recent special moments of bliss that you can share off and on stage? Anything special recently?
Well, I think doing Oberon in Midsummer Night's Dream at Glyndebourne is always a special thing. It's a production that I've done before in Peter Hall's iconic 1981 production that was premiered just a few days after I was born in 1981.
Oh, wow.
So I always felt it was my destiny to do it. And it's been sung by all the great countertenors. I mean, it was originated by James Bowman, who then passed it on to Michael Chance and then to Bejan Mehta. And then for the last 2 runs, it's been little old me. I did joke this summer, but I wonder if there's some truth in it that I perhaps have only been cast because they they do rely on the countertenor being rather tall, because the look of the costume. So I shall, I once lost a role for being too tall. So if I get one for being too tall, this is a bonus.
I'm on one of your social media channels. You put a clip of yourself just narrating the Shakespeare from that. And honestly speaking, and I'm not just saying this, I actually didn't believe it was you. You just sounded so different, and I was like, you're such a good actor. Did you have special training in acting?
Outside? No, acting was always the thing that terrified me about being an opera singer, because I'd sung since I was 7, but I'd never, apart from one role as a child, I'd never really been on stage in that capacity. But I think if I had my time again, I'd probably try another impossible career and try and be an actor.
You're a really good actor, I think. Really good.
I do find I enjoy the acting side of opera more than the singing side sometimes these days. And the annoying thing is that if you really fully commit to the acting as you would as a straight actor, you can't really do the singing in the way you want to. There's a compromise to be made when you're doing opera acting, which is a shame. But I do enjoy it. I do when I feel comfortable in a staging and I feel like the parameters of where we create are defined in my head. I feel quite an immense amount of freedom. And it'd be great to be on stage one day and be singing in my own language, not just Italian, which is what I'm doing for 4 hours a night at the moment. Which you get very accomplished at doing these things, but nothing quite beats the immediacy of your native tongue.
Yes. Well, lovely. So, before I let you go, could you just share, like, what can we look forward to? What are you looking forward to? You have a very busy schedule, I know that. So, what's next, and where can we catch you? What's going on?
So straight after this, I'm going home for a little bit, but then I'm going to Cleveland, my first time in Cleveland, to work with the great Cleveland Orchestra, where I'll be revisiting George Benjamin's symphonic song cycle for countertenor and a small female chorus called Dream of the Song, which I've just been getting back into now. It's very complicated, like all George's music, but once it's in your brain and in your skin, it feels like he's dictated your thoughts almost precisely. And it's quite an interesting set of texts. It's sort of 5 texts that are based on Iberian poetry that's originally in Hebrew, and it's kind of about the whole universe in miniature. It's got bits that are incredibly expansive, and other things that are so intimate and talking about the minute troubles of man, or even the opening, which talks about the wonderful yet dangerous potential of the written word. So it really covers, and I get to sing a song about a gazelle, which is not something you do very often. I don't think I've ever sung the word gazelle in any other context. So that'd be great. I mean, and it'll be the piece has never been performed in Cleveland before. I think it's only been performed in America maybe once or even twice. Wow. So great privilege to be chosen by the composer to give that performance,
to bring it to life. Yeah, absolutely.
And then of course we get into March, so it's
Messiah,
Bach, the Passion all the time, which is great. I'll be back in Amsterdam at the world famous Concertgebouw here to sing some performances, and one in London, which is a rare treat. And then I think back to America for more Bach in Boston, and then another world premiere in Toronto.
Okay.
I've had a new piece written for me, which I need to start learning, but it's.
Can you share who the composer is?
Yes, it's a man called Matthew Ricketts, and he's been very very generous with his sketches, and I've seen all parts of creation of this piece, so it'll be very interesting to finally get it together.
I can't wait to hear this one. Yeah, lots of good stuff. So thank you so much. Congratulations on all the beautiful music. Really, beautiful music you've been putting out. I hope you have a very successful close to Agrippina, and and safe travels. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Please, you can subscribe to everything Tim has. He has a wonderful website. He's on Facebook. He's on, see, X. He's on Instagram, and he's got loads of beautiful music out there. So if you don't already have all these albums and more, please check them out. Subscribe to my channel, and hope we all have a very good year ahead. Bye. There we go.